All right, so if these guys can do it, anybody can do it because they're in industries, again, that are not seen as usually sustainable friendly, but there's always a way. Every industry has to be a sustainable industry going forward. So James, maybe, maybe each panelist can introduce, and I'll go straight from my left, James.
Yeah, happy to kick us off. So hi everyone, James da Costa. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a digital bank for African youth called Fingo, and we enable young people in 5 minutes to get access to a current account, a savings account, and an investment account. And we work with one of the largest banks in Africa called EcoBank. And I think for us, one of the things that we're really thinking about is how can we get young Africans, the youngest continent in the history of the world, access to global services, enable them to spend money like many of us can, but at the same time spend that sustainably, track what they're spending, and understand the context of their spending as well. So really, really excited to dive into this conversation.
Great, thank you. I'm Nicholas. I built up a fashion brand together with my wife, who's also here, and we offer affordable, ethical fashion and engage a lot in tree planting. So we actually started with $5,000, turned into 1.5 million of tree planting donations. And yeah, that's actually the most difficult part that we were trying to face, is how to make sustainability affordable, because sustainability costs, but if it's not affordable, less people can afford it, it's less like kind of a mass thing, and I believe that's the way to go, at least that's what we believe in.
Nicholas joins us from Switzerland, right?
Yeah, we're based in Switzerland and trying to internationalize, but it's not that easy.
Good afternoon. My name is Wanetsha Mosinyi. I look after sustainability for DBS Group. I always say when people ask, the category is that we're not in mining. We sell love because we are the only brand or luxury brand that really sells love. And to sell love, it has emotions, so you need to be as sustainable as you can be. There's no room, there's no chance. So we've been in the space of sustainability since from day one, and we've set ambitious goals, 12 ambitious goals, where we are looking at how do we lead the industry to be sustainable in terms of ethically mining and be able to trace a diamond from mine to finger, and bring along some of the smaller mines into the equation. But how do we also be carbon neutral? How do we preserve water? And how are we inclusive? Obviously, we're looking at, like I said, we're selling love and emotions. I'm happy to be here.
And when that's why we appreciate you being here, the most important company in Botswana, and an extremely famous company across the world. Maybe first question to you: how do you change? So much of this has to do with culture. I mean, how many employees does De Beers have here in Botswana?
Here in Botswana, over 6,000.
6,000. So I will assume that that's the kind of thing where to really make it stick, you need to get everybody rowing in the same direction, so to speak. So how do you change culture? How do you create that culture where everyone is focused on sustainability in a company that's been around, for decades and decades and decades? So it requires change, presumably.
Yeah, I think it actually goes beyond the employees, because I think, as the president said yesterday, the whole economy is anchored on diamonds. It's a good and bad thing, but obviously you have to ensure that, I think before everything else, safety is one of our values, to make sure that anything that we do, there's safety. But obviously, Botswana, I think you've heard that we do anything with Boto, which is how we gracefully conduct ourselves. And obviously, being here in Botswana means that both internally, within ourselves, our communities that we mine, and obviously our external communities, means that everyone needs to live those values and obviously tell the stories of the diamonds, how the diamonds do good. I think you've interacted with a few people of, sharing their stories, how, for example, they would have, thanks to diamonds or through diamonds, could have access education from primary to university. So those are stories of the impact in terms of livelihoods, but obviously health, to make sure that our communities have access to some of the world-class health facilities in where we operate. Because without the people, there are no diamonds. And as the president said, without Botswana, there's no diamonds in the world.
I have toured the Botswana headquarters of De Beers. It's actually quite an amazing place. It's the biggest, first of all, the biggest security I've ever been through because they don't want you walking out with any of the material. So, but when I mentioned the President Masisi on Monday, and it really was just kind of spur of the moment, but as we were talking about blockchain, that diamonds are an NFT in their own ways, to the extent that De Beers and the industry has moved to be able to authenticate where diamonds come from and can track them to try to get around some of the problems of the past. Maybe I would like to contrast it with the two startup founders here. So how do you create that culture of sustainability from day one? Or or is it about starting first, having some success, and then doing that?
No, I think for me it's something you do day one, and I think here's the opportunity in Africa and East Africa.
James, we'll remind everyone where you're based.
Yeah, so I'm based in Nairobi. I'm British, Indian, and Kenyan, so I kind of draw my roots from a few different places, and I was on the list in Europe a few years ago, and this is now my second company. And I think that speaks to the opportunity because, as I said before, such a young, vibrant population in Africa, but there's really, really big problems to solve and things that haven't been done before. So as we're building a bank, we can do it in a totally new way and embed kind of sustainability and environmental viewpoints from day one. So some of that stuff, we're taking innovation from the rest of the world and bringing it to Africa, like, scanning your ID and passport. That's something that people don't usually do in Kenya, and we're having to educate them. But at the same time, when you transact and send money, we can send cool little messages or, show you who you're sponsoring this month or show you kind of what your environmental footprint is on a very kind of fun, interactive consumer level. And that goes, through to our employees as well. And so I think that's the opportunity, is to just do things in a totally new way from the beginning, then be locked up by past kind of views or systems.
Well, that's what President Masisi was talking about when he talked about leapfrogging, that you have an ability to start things right because instead of trying to catch up, you could just jump ahead. So, and that's the opportunity here in Botswana and here across Africa. Nick, your thoughts?
Maybe in our case it was a bit different actually. We didn't start as a sustainable fashion brand. We just wanted to give something back to nature. We were scouts. And then customers told us we should go for it, and only then we Googled what it actually means and saw that it's too expensive. And only then actually the whole thing came with the employees, and I think that's the most important part.
Can you maybe talk a little bit, and it ties into the fashion show we have later, sustainable fashion being so important, because people don't know this, but fashion is the second biggest creator of environmental harm, only behind energy industry. So explain to folks why that is, and two, what you guys are doing about it specifically, that you pivoted to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bad things in fashion actually. We produce way more than we actually use. A lot of it comes into landfills. There's a lot of CO2 and so on. And yeah, although we're producing sustainable fashion today, we're going to see sustainable fashion. The most sustainable thing would actually be to not make any new fashion and to just use what we have as long as possible. And there's kind of trends going into that with circularity and so on, but I think the world is actually not ready for that yet.
Let's talk about consumers and shifting shifting preferences. Have you noticed, I think diamonds being a good example, because diamonds are literally as old as humanity, have you seen shifts in consumer preferences?
Yeah, no, I think starting with just millennial to general, obviously they want cooler designs, for example. But obviously, like I said, they need to trace where that diamond comes from and whether its path, it had made sure that it's done good, it's been sustainable. So what we are looking at, for example, one of the mega trends is circularity, because right now we sort of are recycling things. But circularity requires you now to redesign, reuse even at production level. Like you were saying in fashion, is that how do we take a used clothing material or fashion to reuse, but how do you redesign it at production level to make sure that you bring it back, you use probably close to zero in terms of wastage. So in that way, whether it's the industry itself, because the circularity, for example, in the diamond industry would say, how do we going to resell our grandma's diamond rings, coming back into being redesigned because you could have inherited it, but how do you make it cooler now, looking at the new trends. But at the same time, as an industry, how do we make sure that when you design that ring, you have made sure that it's a ring that is from Botswana, not somewhere else? But obviously, like now, we're using blockchain to make sure that that DNA is embedded from mine to finger, so through our tracer program. So that's making sure that at least you are able to be sure to say if you reuse, recycle, redesign, you are 100% guaranteed that at the beginning it was the right sustainable product.
And then how do you communicate that? Again, that's smart business. Then how do you let the consumer, who's used to decades of branding that diamonds were mined in bad ways? So how do you communicate that new process that you guys have put into place?
You have to tell the stories, the good stories. Like the advantage of you be able to scan that diamond is that besides its traceability, you are able to also share the good stories, but obviously educate the consumer, even to a point where the packaging itself that you've put that diamond at Forevermark store at the far end, it's also been done sustainably. That I think, for example, a few weeks ago, we were remodeling a store in China. I think if you've seen the cups that are made of clay, they are done from a project called Tamaha Pottery. The same product, you will find it in a DBS store in China or in the UK, to showcase that they can actually coexist with some of the natural man-made things that are done in Botswana, to be able to showcase that impact and those stories.
And I think just to kind of jump on top of that, what we've seen at Fingo is, young African consumers, they want luxury, they want great quality products, but, in fact, they're demanding these be sustainable at the same time. So for us, one of the things people wanted is US fractional stocks. But actually young people, they don't want to invest in BP or Shell or oil companies. They want to invest in Tesla. They want to, when they buy cool brands, they want to know that those brands are sustainable, and it's on you as the company, as the brand, to actually bring that worth straight up, whether it's in diamonds, and they're tech savvy enough to actually fact check you. They're not going to accept, BS from you. They're actually going to say, they're hooked up on the technology, and they're going to call you out if you don't. And actually, this is interesting. Consumers, more than anywhere else in the world here, like, they'll backlash you on Twitter. They'll come for you if you don't actually do what you say.
Yeah, but we also have to see we're here in a world open community, and I think a lot of people actually are not willing to pay a premium for sustainable products. Although, or
maybe they don't even have that option.
Yeah. Exactly, that's the thing. That's why I'd be interested if in your case customers are willing to pay a premium or not. Because in our case, I think just a few are willing to really pay a premium.
No, 100%. I think the Forevermark brand, for example, only selects 1% of the best diamonds. That means in terms of cost, it's actually at a premium, but you find that it's performing well in terms of the industry. And obviously, I think if you had looked at the current Russia and Ukraine issue, is that the diamonds was in question as well, because probably now we're at par, or at some point Russia was the biggest producer of diamonds. So that means you've put a question, or you pulled back. I think the US banned import of Russian diamonds. That means the consumer as well is now asking in a DBS store whether the diamond comes from. So now you need to accelerate how you're going to prove the origin of that diamond, and obviously that they will be willing to pay a premium for.
And I think that's obviously for a luxury brand, the provenance. I mean, there's a reason if somebody owns a painting, it sells for more depending on who owns it. So that certainly makes sense. Nicholas, to your point about clothes, I mean, there's some people who just need to clothe themselves as affordably as possible. You kind of bake in sustainability with your, you have your plant a tree program. Maybe you could talk about that, and also whether that's something. Warby Parker, of course, was very famous with you buy a pair of eyeglasses, they'll give you a free pair to somebody who needs them. I'm questioning whether does that model, is that as fresh as it's not as fresh as it was, but does that still have resonance? I mean, maybe talk about your experience doing that and how you put that into place.
Yeah, I mean, 5 years ago, this was already a reason for people to buy it. They thought it was cool, but now it feels like every second company in the world is planting trees. But I think that's really, really nice. But yeah, when we went more into sustainable fashion, we realized that it's not possible to kind of cover all aspects of sustainability. So you had to kind of make a strategy for and decide on what you focus. And even if you have that, you can do 10 things good, but if there's one thing that is not good, then there's actually always someone pointing on it. And that's why you need to not only have a sustainability strategy, you also need a sustainability communication strategy. And that's one thing we learned on the way.
I want to ask, we have three, entrepreneurial people here. I'll throw it out there. What do the entrepreneurs think about whether or not government should be mandating certain levels of sustainability versus business leading on its own? And of course the answer is a little bit of both. It's always on where the spectrum is, but I'm not going to let anyone say both. I'm going to make you pick one area that you'd like to discuss.
For me, I think I'm as an entrepreneur, I really see things as business-led. And so, we're in fintech. Regulation is one of our kind of biggest constraints. And if, regulation eased up a little bit on the finance front, but also, in different aspects so that actually new players could compete in some of these textiles industries, in, different productions industries, in manufacturing. If startups could come and play there, actually, I think you'd see a lot more young companies who have sustainability at their core coming up and disrupting some of the big African players, even, in things like cement and, various other products. So I would say kind of business-led and, let Africa lead with its entrepreneurial roots.
I would say government-led. I really do think they have the biggest kind of like, force to change something, subsidizing things, especially circularity when it comes to take-back programs. But I would also add a third group, and I think customers or consumers are actually also responsible to inform themselves. But it's some bit of a chicken and an egg problem, who starts first? But I think it's these three groups.
Yeah, I think you cannot do it without government. I'll just give you an example of the building that you went, which it houses our diamond trading company and what you call global site holders.
Basically, getting to Beard's headquarters, it's like the Matrix. They basically put you in a chamber and do a full scan. Yeah. It's amazing, actually.
Yeah. So we've completed phase 1 of solar project. That means in the coming 2-3 years, that building is completely going to be operated on solar. But for you to do that, you need to have government approval and making sure that you don't go on the grid, which uses fossil fuel. But that needs policy change to be able to move that. But I think for us as DBS is that because we've led the industry and government is a partner, there's nothing we can move or do without government.
I think the challenge for everybody here, the entrepreneurs, is to move quickly enough that the government doesn't have to do anything. Because we all know that when government does it from the top down, it's not often well done, and it's not. I'm speaking of every government in the world. Basically, it's an inefficient way to create wealth. Where entrepreneurs have proven very efficient, but again, there needs to be regulation. The key for entrepreneurs, I served for 5 years on a board called Just Capital, which is a nonprofit board with the idea. It was founded by Paul Tudor Jones, who's an American financial billionaire, with the idea that business needs to lead on this so that government doesn't have to lead. And I think these are good perspectives, but I think that's a challenge to everybody here, that there is pressure, and if the private sector can't do it, you're inviting solutions from the public sector that will not necessarily be as efficient or as effective, frankly. But sometimes business doesn't want to do it because it's harder and because it costs in the short term, even if the benefits are there in the long term. Can any of you give an example of an investment you've made in sustainability that didn't pay off immediately, but that you did because you thought it would in the long term?
Like you said, besides just the cost, there's not even R&D available for sustainability at the moment. For example, we're embarking on what we call a carbon vault with our parent company, Anglo, where around the mines, when you mine and you extract the ore, that ore can actually capture carbon dioxide more than the trees. So that's actually, it's probably going to cost more than some of the critical components of mining itself. but you have to do it to make sure that you are sustainable. So the cost of sustainability, I think at this pace, because we are starting at R&D, are actually going to be higher than some of the priority projects that you actually want to implement to make sure that you put product to play. So unfortunately, it's what we'll have to take the cost, and I think it is worth it for our future generation.
I'd actually like to give an example where we didn't make the investment, and it's about the packaging we use when we send products to our customers. I mean, there's reusable packaging that you get, and then you can just drop it in the mailbox, and it goes back. And this would have cost us about $500,000 more per year, which is a lot of money for us. And there, unfortunately, did not make the investment. But I hope that at some point we have the money. So there's many examples where that's the case also, especially if you're self-financed and cannot wait for 3 years until some return comes.
What about, and Nicholas, you mentioned the consumer demand. Have you seen, each of you in your careers, well, obviously there is more attention on this, but have we hit a tipping point? Because there's sometimes I think, wow, consumers are, especially younger consumers, have finally focused on this. But then sometimes I look at what's going on, and I look at, at companies with sales. I look at sales, and I'm like, you know what? A lot of people, there are a lot of noisy people, but at the end of the day, people voting with their pocketbooks sometimes aren't necessarily doing that. So where are we on the spectrum of the consumer? Because at the end of the day, the consumers could make this happen more quickly if they wanted.
I think from our perspective, at least, from our spend analytics, and that's one of the things we've really looked at, is a real shift away from actually kind of physical assets in today. Young Africans want digital assets, and they want to generate wealth in a sustainable way for the future. And so what do our consumers want from us? They want access to global stock markets to invest in sustainable companies. They want NFTs and digital assets like that, and they want to spend money on subscriptions. And actually what we're seeing spend on fast fashion, physical goods and things like that is going on the downturn. I've at least found that really, really interesting.
It's in two parts, right? So us from the extra industry, our emissions are physical. You can see them. For example, if you want to go carbon neutral, the first is you need to measure and see how much you emit CO2 in terms of your assets or whatever you do. The second scope is looking at using fossil fuels in whatever you do, whether it's a Tesla. But one question is that I would be driving a Tesla and thinking it's carbon, it doesn't use fossil fuels, but the tires and every part that is in that car, where does it come from? Is it using copper and nickel? Which country is that copper and nickel coming from? Were there any human rights abuse? So you find that when we're on Twitter and everyone, there's the cancel culture, but it's just that there's not much information that in every way we do, we're actually, on scope 3 now we're looking at actually as the consumer, we're the biggest emitters of CO2 compared to industries. And that's the biggest challenge of the future.
Well, so you bring up a great point in that your company's big enough that you could throw weight around down the chain, and that what do you guys, if anything, do about your vendors and your suppliers to hold them to this? You don't have to do that, obviously, but you can. So.
Yeah. So we have now what to call the best practices assurance. So, for example, we sell diamonds from South Africa, Namibia, and Canada and Botswana. It's through our site holders. So every site holder goes through a contractual agreement. Every year, they have to go through assurance to make sure that they meet those. It's like an audit. It's like international standards that they have to go through. Beyond that, the jewelry makers, and through Tracer, we're using a platform, an open platform that every supplier, even how small, because they cannot afford the cost of those assurances, are able to access that. So hence, that's why we did it for the industry. Because if a diamond is moved from us to our site holders, to the jewelry makers, to the stores, everyone in that value chain, in what we call the pipeline in the diamond industry, needs to be able to show that assurance and pass that assurance. If they're not, they're out in the next cycle. And we have to then bring more sustainable.
And I think maybe the reality of where we are today is consumers and companies are saying, yes, we're doing stuff. And maybe we'll hear some things this afternoon, but I haven't quite seen the rubber hitting the road yet. So even in us, we asked our consumers, do you want a physical card? Would you give up a physical card, 1,000 people, to, benefit the environment? And then we actually pushed that feature live. And of those 1,000 people, 50% said that, they'd be willing to, but actually then 90% signed up for a card. And so, what are the actions people really taking?
Yeah, I mean, we are a brand, also I personally actually believe that the world should first focus on that everybody improves, let's say 10%, and then everybody makes a small step instead of just a small group looks for a perfect solution. And I think that's what we should aim for, for incremental changes and improvements.
At the end of the day, it's true. Consumers can drive this faster if they want. One more, and we're running out of time, but who here, and we see you up in the upper deck there. That looks fun up there. Who here is currently raising money or looking to raise money soon for a startup? Let's see a show of hands. All right, nice. Got about 3 dozen here. So for the two recent founders, when you're raising money from venture capital, are they asking you these questions? And if they are, do you think they really care? Is this an advantage, or is this something again that it's a longer term consumer play?
My candid view. Our company, we closed a $4 million seed round last September after Y Combinator. But it's still, for me, it's this rubber hit the road. Everyone's talking about it, everyone does it, and then when you really get into the conversations, people are they actually want the financial return first before they want the environmental impact. They're saying, yes, we want this, this, and this, and then when you get into the deep conversations and the DD, they back out and they're not willing to compromise. And so, we were fortunate. We took on a lot of angels, and so we were able to kind of pursue our mission instead of some of the larger funds. But I haven't seen that real change yet, unfortunately.
I mean, I cannot really tell so well because we don't have any investors, but the few talks we had, I also think I can confirm what you just said.
Bootstrap, I love it.
Yeah, but it's getting quite difficult at the moment, to be honest. But I mean, the few talks we had, also people focus more on the marketing numbers, the sales numbers, the return and so on. But there are a few kind of investment funds that really do care about sustainability, and there this is crucial. But for the rest, unfortunately, not yet.
So what I took from here, first of all, thank you all, and that again, if we could do this in diamonds, fashion, and finance, anybody could do it. Sustainability is not just for quote unquote green companies. Every company needs to be sustainable. But that too, at the end of the day, we're just in the early days. We're just in the early days here, and at the end of the day, everybody here plays a role, because to the extent that consumer demand, market demand, vendor selection, etc. So I'm leaving inspired, and we appreciate your time. And we're going to bring our next panel, which is actually going to take this conversation further, because they're going to focus on the next generation of sustainable leaders, which is really also all of us here in this audience, and how we really put those values into place so that we're accelerating this. But gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. And
Thank you.
comments.
Thank you.